Hi, my name is Owen, or O for short, and I'm an oxygen molecule. My weekend was very busy, but between one of the 50 assignments I'm working on for Mr. Trober, I decided to take a break and watch a race. The sun was out and the birds were chirping. Everything was great until a Homo sapien ran straight into me, sucking me right into his nasal cavity. Into the nasal cavity I went. This is where I first entered the respiratory system, which is in charge of gas exchange. It was dark, humid, and very frightening. I traveled through the pharynx, the area where the paths for air and food cross. Then through the larynx, also known as the voice box. The epiglottis was open, so I traveled through the trachea and down to one of the bronchus, which are one of the two pipes that split off from the trachea into the lungs. These bronchus split into smaller and smaller pipes known as bronchioles. The entire pathway there was lined with mucus and cilia, which served to prevent pollen and dust from entering the lungs. The lung structure fits its function as the amount of oxygen diffusing membrane is maximized to allow more O2, myself, to be diffused with each and every breath. The bronchioles are covered with tiny sacs called alveoli. They are thin and moist, which allows O2 to diffuse through the membrane and into the blood-carrying capillaries, beginning my journey through the circulatory system. Taken captive by a blood cell, I traveled through the pulmonary vein to the four-chambered heart. The left ventricle has a very high pressure to pump out oxygenated blood. We move through the aorta and out to the arteries, the large, highway-like tubes that carry blood away from the heart. The heart has a pacemaker, which pumps blood at varying speeds to provide the body with oxygen. Since this particular Homo sapien was running a race, his pacemaker was moving incredibly fast. We zipped out of the heart very quickly. The blood cell and I traveled away from the heart through the arteries. The arteries carried us away into smaller tubes known as arterioles. These arterioles feed into smaller tubes known as the capillary bed. At these capillary beds, I met something known as the cell. I diffused into the cell and went inside this thick, fluidy place known as the cytoplasm. As I was drifting around in the cytoplasm, I met a large molecule known as glucose. He was made of 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygen. He underwent a process known as glycolysis, where 2 ATP split him apart into 2 pyruvate, a 3-carbon compound. It also produced 2 NADH and 4 ATP, for a net total of 2 ATP. However, the process wasn't done yet. The 2 pyruvate were groomed into 2-acetyl-CoA. As the 2-acetyl-CoA and I were drifting around, we ran into an organelle known as the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Inside this mitochondria, the last 2 phases of cellular respiration take place. One of these is known as the citric acid cycle. In the citric acid cycle, a acetyl group is added to the 4-carbon compound, forming citrate, which is degraded back to the starting 4-carbon compound. For each turn of the cycle, 2 CO2 are released, and the energy yield is 1 ATP, 3 NADH, and 1 FADH, which would produce twice as much since the cycle runs twice. I went inside the oxidative phosphorylation stage, in which the electron transport chain, the electrons transported from the NADH and FADH, travel to me O2. During this process, I pick up hydrogen atoms to form water. This produces a lot of power for the cell because almost 34 ATP are produced, providing the cell with lots of energy. Now, normally, I bond with hydrogen to form water. However, for the sake of this project, I decided to bond with carbon. I didn't really like carbon, and I didn't really like being inside a human, so we decided to get out of the cell. So we went back to the capillary bed and out venules, which are larger tubes that take blood towards the heart, and then to the veins. We went back to the heart, and in the heart we were able to leave through the pulmonary artery back to the lungs. At the lungs, we went in through the alveoli, back through the bronchioles, to the bronchi, to the trachea, and back out to the pharynx. We were released through his nasal cavity as carbon dioxide. The human was very sweaty, which is an evolutionary adaptation designed to cool the body. We went to a plant. I knew I could separate myself from carbon there. We entered through a pore in the leaf known as stomata. There are 3 major systems of a plant, including the roots, the stems, and the leaves. Obviously, I went through the leaves. Now, the leaves have a vascular tissue, which are similar to the veins that carry food and water rather than blood. The top and bottom layers of the leaves are known as the epidermis. Then there is a bottom layer on the leaf known as the spongy cells, which allow for gas exchange. Then there are tubes known as xylem, which carry H2O. Finally, there's a palisade layer, which has chloroplast, seen as the green dots. These allow for photosynthesis to take place. We entered through the stoma, which is a pore that allows oxygen and carbon dioxide, which I am now, to move in and out of the leaf. The chloroplasts are the organelle in which photosynthesis takes place. There are 2 stages known as the light-dependent and light-independent reactions. The light-dependent reactions takes place in stacks of thylakoids known as grana. Light-dependent takes H2O and light energy through pigments such as chlorophyll A and B that take electrons and put them on a higher energy level through the light energy. This produces ATP and NADPH, as well as oxygen as a byproduct. In the Calvin cycle, known as the light-independent reactions, carbon fixation takes CO2 and turns it into G3P, which is used to make sugars. It consumes ATP and produces ADP positive and NADPH, or NADP positive. Normally CO2 would turn into glucose, but for the sake of this project, I'm turning back into oxygen. I leaf through the stomata, and I'm back in the atmosphere. Good old O2. Now, photosynthesis and cellular respiration are 2 very important processes that feed each other. Carbon dioxide and water in photosynthesis turn into glucose and oxygen, and in cellular respiration, glucose and oxygen turn back into water and carbon dioxide. Alright, a few key points to make. There are 2 organ systems discussed, including respiratory system, which is in charge of the gas exchange, and the circulatory system, which is in charge of blood flow. Now, there are quite a few organs that make up each system, including the heart, lungs, alveoli, the veins, and the arteries. Each of these play a major role in accomplishing the final task of the system. The cellular processes discussed include cellular respiration and photosynthesis. Now, cellular respiration takes organic compounds and turns them into inorganic compounds, whereas photosynthesis takes inorganic and turns it into organic compounds. Cellular respiration takes sugars and turns them into ATP, whereas photosynthesis harvests light's energy. Now, they both fuel each other. Evolution is a key process that has allowed organisms to become the way they are today. Favorable traits lead to more reproductive success, as stated by natural selection. This is exemplified in humans in the circulatory and respiratory systems. For example, we need more oxygen as we have become bigger, and the membranes in the lungs are maximized in regards to their surface area, which allows us to receive more oxygen. The lungs likely involved in an aquatic animal, which allowed future generations to be able to move on to land. Maintaining homeostasis is also a key part of the circulatory and respiratory system. For example, too much carbon dioxide would alter the pH and heat of the organism, which could denature proteins and ultimately kill the organism. So, the circulatory and respiratory system help expel CO2, thus maintaining homeostasis.